The first writers in residence came to the James Merrill House 25 years ago, shortly after James Merrill's death in 1995. Since then, over 80 writers have visited, staying in his home, a National Historic Landmark, to work on projects of their own. Thanks to Merrill's generosity, the house now belongs to the Stonington Village Improvement Association and is an ongoing inspiration for writers and poets from around the world. For more information, visit our website, jamesmerrillhouse.org. Thank you.
So, hi. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bergen. It is lovely to see the James Merrill hidden study of 107 behind you. It's very nostalgic.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks so much. So this is my new book. It's called The Math Campers.
My own novel. It's called These Women.
It looks like this.
Well, the first thing I'll say is all the dreams are actual dreams. There's nothing worse than a fabricated dream. You can always tell.
I normally don't write in first person because of the fact that as soon as you have a narrator, you tend to have somebody listening, or there's an implied audience.
I just got to soak up in the atmosphere in that house. You just feel like a writer, and you feel like you're part of this tradition and a community, and it feels like the work is important.
Magical things happen when you're looking at Merrill's books.
Well, it was a really, really transformative residency for me. It might sound like a bit of an overstatement, but it really wasn't.
Merrill's really distinct imagination was present in every detail.
Thanks, Brendan. Bye. Enjoy Stonington on my behalf.
That was great. I always love hearing from our former writers. There's Dan Chasen, who's poetry critic for The New Yorker, Keelan Hughes, Ivy Pacoda, others in that clip for our Studio 107 series. Welcome to the James Merrill House Writer Series. I hope you've all had a good day outside and hugging your relatives and friends, I hope, if you can. I'm Jeffrey Little, committee member of the James Merrill House Writer in Residence program, now in our 25th year. I hope you've enjoyed our other streaming events. Recently, the acclaimed novelist Marlon James gave us a bravura reading and insight into his work. And we've just concluded a 3-part series on the newly published letters of James Merrill entitled A Whole World, which received rave reviews really, in both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Review of Books, which I think is probably the first time those two publications have agreed on anything. And many other publications reviewed it favorably too. So any sessions you missed, you can catch here on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page. In a moment, we'll welcome our current writer in residence and hear both some of his poetry and from his new memoir. First, a little bit on Merrill House. If you're watching today, you probably know about us. If you don't, Merrill House is a group of about 20 of us on the committee, all volunteers, and we have one part-time coordinator just in the last year. We offer our events and readings free to support writers and the literary life and legacy of Stonington. I ask that you consider a contribution of $10 or $20 or $200. You can go to our website, jamesmerrillhouse.org, and make a pledge or contribution via PayPal or by check to the address on the website. Thank you. You can tell I worked in PBS for 15 years, I think. Today, we're going to hear from our current writer in residence, Greg Wrenn. I met Greg recently in person, just 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks into his residency here. And we sat outside at Whalen's Wharf under the gazebo on a blustery day looking out onto Stonington Harbor. And Greg told me that he had spent the previous 3 weeks in isolation, total isolation in the Merrill House, working both on new poetry and collection, and focusing primarily on his memoir entitled Row, which is a work in process. A chapter of Row titled Paddle is online. It was online last summer at the Georgia Review and is still up, and other parts have been published in the Iowa and Kenyon reviews. I believe that Greg will read us a new section of the memoir today. And it turned out that our Harborside setting for our talk was apropos, because Greg, in many ways, I learned, is a waterman, a man of the water and shaped by water. Well, of course, many other things. Growing up in Jacksonville, he was surrounded by the ocean and the shimmering inland waters. Those of you who know the northern part of Florida. He's been a diver for 25 years and is a PADI certified nitrox diver. I think he's our first poet who was PADI certified nitrox diver. For those of you who know diving, this is serious stuff, Navy kind of level stuff, breathing a combination of nitrogen and oxygen to go deeper and stay under longer. And I think that makes more sense when you hear his work. And to top it off, he's a Pisces. We joked about that. You will hear that nature and the natural world play a significant role, both in his poetry and in the memoir. Greg's first collection of poetry, Centaur, which you see on the screen here, was published by University of Wisconsin Press as the winner of the 2012 Brittingham Prize, selected by poet Terrence Hayes. Hayes said, "When quantifying the book, the images of water came increasingly to mind. Water is appropriately the last word in a book as paradoxically elusive and clear as the humid air between lovers." And then he notes the recurring images in the poems of the murky stream, the flooded meadows, the clear winter sea. Our dear friend and Stonington resident, the late Sandy McClatchy, said, "The terrific, turbulent poems in Greg Wrenn's Centaur seem as much etched as written. Acid exact, black promises on white possibilities, lines and spaces cross-hatched with thrilling precision. These poems will startle you at first and then haunt you long after." I found Sandy's evaluation, well, and yeah, if you want to be blurb, Sandy was a wonderful writer, of course, and editor. I found Sandy's evaluation resonant to my reading of them, as I found the poems, did find them startling in their tone, image, and actions. And I look forward to hearing one or two today. Greg's poems, in fact, were selected by Sandy McClatchy when he was editor of the Yale Review, as well as appearing in the American Poetry Review, the New England Review, and many others. A graduate of Harvard and Washington University in St. Louis, Greg was a Stegner Fellow at Stanford. He was also recipient of the Lyric Poetry Award from the Poetry Society of America. And he's now teaching at James Madison University in Virginia and taking up residence there. Greg joins us now from the Flame Dining Room. We call it the Flame, that's the color, Greg, and of the Merrill apartment. Welcome, Greg, and to your partner off screen, Tony, who I understand joined you for the last part of the residency.
Yes, he has. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here.
Wonderful. And it's been great to get to know you a little bit. So you're out of isolation, as we are all emerging. Tell us about your time so far at Merrill House.
Well, first off, I just want to thank everyone at the Merrill House for being so incredibly supportive. It's just been such an honor to live in Merrill's home, to work at his desk for now 5 weeks. I want to thank Randy Bean, especially Penny Duckham, the co-chairs, and of course, thank you, Jeffrey, to you, to Thomas, our tech guy, and of course to program coordinator Bergen O'Malley, and to Tony, who has been incredibly supportive, cooking and cleaning and offering moral support as I dive deep. So yeah, no, it's been an incredible experience being here and being able to see the ocean and smell the ocean, hear the ocean as I work. and to just feel Merrill's benevolent presence here.
That's great. Well, tell us, today we have kind of a double header. We have you as a poet and emerging memoirist. Will you tell us first about your work and life as a poet and read some?
Sure, absolutely, Jeff.
Okay.
So I just want to say, as a poet, I began as a poet. Because my first poetry teacher was Henri Cole, who I believe is going to be at the Merrill House later this year. But he was an incredible inspiration to me. That was back in the 20th century. But it's been said many times that
late 20th century.
Late, very late, almost the end. True. It's been said many times that poetry is a way to speak about the unspeakable, to say what can't be put into words or doesn't really want to be. And I think in poetry, I found that to be true in my case, as a young man really struggling with a lot of shame and self-hatred about some unspeakable, bizarre things from my childhood. So I really appreciated that I could make beauty from ugliness, and at the same time not have to be confessional or really direct. I appreciated how self-soothing poetry was, when little else could console me. And I also appreciated having metaphor at my disposal, because sometimes it's good to be indirect. Sometimes it's good to be coded. And perhaps that's when we're actually at our most truthful. So so poetry is where I began. Yeah. And I'm still a poet, but right now I'm more working in prose.
Great. Well, you have a poem or two for us today, I believe.
I do. I have one poem actually, and this was a poem. Jeffrey, you mentioned Sandy McClatchy, and I actually wanted to read a poem in his honor, because he used to live just down the street, and I also kind of feel his presence too in Stonington. So this was actually the first poem that he took of mine, and it's called Promiscuity. And you can kind of hear the some of the coded language, some of the metaphor at work in this poem. Promiscuity. A starling skims the chlorinated pool and touches the water once. I swat a housefly that bit me like a horsefly. I think of wholeness, the summer sky that stays white because of field fires and a hot, weak southern wind. Parrotfish, which never close their eyes, and the saint's eyes on the dish that look deeply into my living carcass, chapped and scoliosed, that study the urethral flap, its soiled membrane. This morning there were dreams I misremembered and wrote in a book. And the hydrovac goes on cleaning the pool's bottom while its dead float in plain view, mostly hornets in fetal positions and nondescript flies. It's unable to complete its task and rest, like my love for that desolate beach or this figurine that I hold in the sun. Must I look at him again, tied to the same chipped column and orange red from the lashing? How many times did I reach into those waves for a broken cowrie to scrape the tar off my feet? I must stop thinking about my heart. I'll make a thread of myself, shed bones and fat and lust, taper into floss, fiber optics, a pure line of dreaming and attention, then spider morning mesh. That's the poem, Promiscuity. I think that's probably going to be the only poem I'm going to read today.
Okay.
But you can kind of hear some of the water imagery in that one.
Yes. Well, and either I wasn't reading well, but I felt I wasn't understanding and appreciating your poetry as I read some in Centaur. And then hearing it just now, it made so much more sense. It's the beauty of
Yeah.
a reading. Well read. Thank you.
Thank you so
Well
much.
written,
Thank you
of
so
course.
much. Yeah.
So just a taste of your poetry. It's almost just an amuse-bouche or soupçon poetry. But Centaur, I'm going to plug Centaur now, is
Thank you so
available.
much.
You can order via Bank Square Books, and I encourage you to browse and buy books by Merrill writers in residence on the virtual Merrill House shelf. Or now you can stroll in and browse the actual books on the actual shelves. So let's turn to your work in process, your memoir,
Okay.
Row. You've been working on here, and I understand that you might read us a new section, which is very exciting and I think brave to read new work, fresh.
Yeah.
I don't want to spook you, but
No.
no, I don't think you're.
Well, I'm actually in the room where Merrill and David Jackson would have the seances, so I think I'm already a little spooked out in a good way. So it's sort of like E.T.'s spaceship. It's
Yeah.
very it's got a nice dome to it, and it's orange like a citrus fruit.
Right. Or an imaginary spaceship. Yeah.
An imaginary spaceship. Yeah.
So before you read, of course, will you tell us why you turned to memoir?
Yeah.
Because your poetry is obviously stunning, expressive, coded.
Mm-hmm.
So why memoir?
Well, I began to feel two crises at once that I simply did not know how to render into poetry, to put into the genre of poetry. And those two crises, the one involves our planet, the ecological crisis, and then there was also my personal crisis, my could say a crisis involving my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And life has a way of catching up with you, and I could just see that what we were doing on the planet wasn't working out, and I could see that what I was doing in my life wasn't really working out in terms of my happiness and my well-being. Mm-hmm. So I think that when I took this incredible trip, probably about 10 years ago, to the Southern Hemisphere, saved a bucket load of money for that, went into some credit card debt, but visited the Great Barrier Reef before it turned into what it is today. And I think being there, that really awakened my compassion for the planet, but it also awakened compassion for myself. And I think beauty is one of those things that can do that. It can awaken compassion wherever it's directed. And I think that what happened after that was emotional flashbacks to childhood began to kind of proliferate and weigh heavily on me. And so I realized that I needed to confront both the ecological crisis and my own personal crisis at the same time. So, and because those personal flashbacks kind of felt eerily familiar. They felt like the ecological flash forwards that I was having, imagining our future as a species. And I don't mean to overstate that in any way, but just in terms of the raw emotional materials, panic, entrapment, doom, they somehow, neurons that fire together, wire together. It's just how it happened for me. So I knew that I needed to write about the planet. And it took me a while to kind of get the courage and also just the wherewithal to be able to blend the personal and the ecological. So I'm calling what I'm working on right now an eco memoir. And you'll see what I mean when I maybe read some of this.
Lovely. But the floor is yours. We all
thank you.
Love to hear.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. Okay. So this, I did not actually begin this at the Merrill House, but I revised it heavily here and added a lot to it. So it's not especially, it's not sort of fresh off, hot off the presses, so to speak. So the dust has settled a lot with it. But this is December 2016, about a month after Trump was elected president of the United States. And I went to the place that I've gone many times, this incredible archipelago in Indonesia, this group of islands called Raja Ampat. And Raja Ampat has the most intact, has among the most intact, pristine coral reefs in the world. And I'm on probably my fourth or fifth trip there in December of 2016. My hut was almost blown over in a storm. I had visions of ecological collapse. I was remembering election night, and so I was filled with a lot of doom. And then I woke up the next morning on this island, which was very isolated, and here we go. I woke up way too late after sunrise. Since on the equator, there are always only 12 hours of light, I liked to get up when it was dark to meditate and plan my day underwater. Every second was precious, but I wasn't here to rush. I was practicing my 3 S's: slowing down, softening, savoring, to unravel the complex PTSD that had kept me an adult child. To be with these reefs while there was still time, to put aside my kale and 401k concerns and look at living things, not screens. Creatures I was unintentionally helping to destroy and still am. In the stillness, I mixed tepid water with instant sugary coffee. It would have to do. I stepped on the porch in just a towel. The hole in the roof was the only damage I saw on the hut. The new day was clean, inlaid with pink cirrus. Into the glassy lagoon, I wrung out my Hanes underwear, which were my PJs, and a couple of drops echoed out across the little channel toward the other island's mangroves. It was as if I was wringing out all my sluttiness in California, which I'd recently left for Virginia for the tenure-track professorship I'd been praying for. Releasing the pain of seeing my parents in Jacksonville for Thanksgiving for one of the last times. It must have been all the negative ions from the ocean, which research shows lift mood, but I actually felt great. My body wasn't throbbing with psychosomatic pain. Drinking in natural beauty instead of dwelling on societal ills, I sat on the edge of the porch, my feet dangling over the water, and I looked out at the wilderness. No one could see me. If it hadn't been for the hornbills and cockatoos passing over me, or the angler flounder in the shallows below, I would have yodeled. This was where I'd meditate. I saw it. I was here. I was alive in a wilderness that felt like home. Humid and hot and salt-scented like Florida, but with rainforested peaks, basically intact reefs, and few people. In my solitude here, no one could hurt me. Raja Ampat isn't untouched. Nowhere on earth is. Outside the marine protection areas in Raja Ampat, fleets of industrial fishing boats still dragged their enormous nets. For years before there were formal protections, they came here to take as much fish as they could, sometimes using cyanide on the reefs to catch the most gargantuan fish alive for Hong Kong restaurants with point-to-your-dinner aquariums. But now what activist and writer Wendell Berry says of the Red River Gorge in Kentucky, this is an island surrounded by the machinery and workings of an insane greed hungering for the world's end, applied to where I was. People have lived in this area for thousands of years, but I thought it was infinitely more pristine than I was. The latter isn't true, of course. but I wasn't ready to see that yet, even as I knew that calling an area pristine erases indigenous cultures. They know much more about living in harmony with nature than we do. Face it, we, the people of Prozac, fracking, and Zoom. Then all of a sudden, well-being enveloped me. There was a voice in my head saying, trust in the care. I can't explain it. It just happened. I was being embraced by the ring of karst islands and mangroves that protected me last night from the worst of the storm, like a benevolent ghost taking me in its arms. The hug was maternal, not erotic, a distinction that couldn't be more important to me. It was different than Edward Abbey taking in the Utah wilderness and desiring to possess it all, embrace the entire scene intimately, deeply, totally, as a man desires a beautiful woman. I didn't want to possess that swath of Mother Earth or be possessed by it. I wanted to stay open to it, wholeheartedly, radically, as a man lets the rain on his face be enough. All the anonymous sex in the world could not give me this, to be held as a trustworthy mother holds her son. I could remember this happening clearly once before. I was backpacking through Europe, feeling terrible about myself. I had spent the night with a douchebag of a French farmer from Grindr, which is a gay sex app on the phone. Leaving his house, I discovered he had a girlfriend when I saw black high heels thrown in a corner. For a couple of days afterward at a deserted campground, I lived in a trailer. The air was electric and cool. A chubby white dog followed me wherever I went, as if he knew me, as if in some other lifetime I had rescued him. We were inseparable. At the end of the day, I swam naked in the slow river there that was almost a lake. It was nothing like the goddamned bathtub where I was abused in childhood. The mountain behind was thickly forested with holm oaks the owner was paid not to cut down. Amber was the dusk light. Amaze balls, as my students would have jokingly put it. Guarding me, chomping at his reflection on the surface, the dog paddled beside me. There was a moment while swimming I won't forget, the kind you can count on one hand in a life with fingers to spare. The curving land and water were holding me, caring for me in my self-loathing. Utter love, I thought, required another person and marijuana, which is to say, one knot of many in my being undid itself. The ready to punch fist of my heart unclenched a bit. In that moment, I forgave my parents for some measure of their cruelty. So I'm back in Raja Ampat. So as the sprawling bay and interior of the island similarly embraced me, I saw absolutely no evidence of humanity. It was 2016, not some dreadful year like 2216. Obama would still be president for a few more weeks. There were still fish, like the blood-beaked needlefish around the hut's stilts. There were still coral reefs, like the ones poking out around the little karst islands. And there were still rainforests, like the ones breathing on the misty mountains along the bay. Have this positive experience, enrich it, absorb it with abandon. So here I go into a kind of lyrical inner festival, fiesta, okay? Spread your osprey wings. No one can catch you. So this is my imagination just taking off. Spread your osprey wings. No one can catch you. And see the forest spreading around the roadless island, then all over Wegeo, which is another island. where pink-spotted fruit doves live and imperial pigeons and mustached tree swifts and mimic honey eaters, and of course, male red birds of paradise, which every morning perform a noisy, flamboyant courtship dance with plumes, tail wires, and pom-poms to maybe get lucky. Follow the karst fjords with sarang samut, ant-riddled plants for what one local called Viagra tea. But be careful. Saltwater crocodiles are watching you like the father-shaped man standing in front of your dark closet when you were a kid. They know about you. They know where you're soft and numb, that your cries for help mean nothing here. They don't care about your damn healing journey. Drop your past like a cubed wombat turd into a sinkhole, slip out of the self-defeating stories like armor you always thought was your skin, and let it fly off and dissolve. Get yourself to Aljui Bay, whose protected waters are home to zany, fragile creatures not often seen in the shallows, hallucinogenically colored as the Fraggles on Fraggle Rock. Glide past magenta barrel sponges, getting down with Lambert's sea cucumbers, with frilly mouths that seem to say, if you can't accept me at my Blanche Devereaux, you don't deserve me at my Jacques Cousteau. You aren't tripping. Those really are orangutan crabs with swaying orange fur. Work it, work it. Nearby is a secret cove with drapes of carnivorous pitcher plants, watched over by a white-bellied sea eagle. Spy on the crowds of golden stingless jellyfish catching sunlight at the surface. Like coral polyps, giant clams, and spotted salamander eggs, they're gorging on sugars the photosynthesizing algae in their flesh pumps out. Then whoosh over to the pipefish of Fincock and the pregnant male seahorses stalked by cranes and frogfish at Aie, toward the friendly village of Selpele, where for an afternoon, Mama Etty, cooking the best coconut curry chicken and fish soup this side of the Mississippi, makes you feel like you're her son. Eventually, you'll come to the famed limestone pinnacles of Wayag that guard a nursery for baby manta rays. If you still feel like it, fling yourself southeast to Kaliberu, a kingfisher stitched river that's clear and blue even on cloudy days. Row, 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 oh frabjous Raja Ampat, Kalay Kalu. So after this point, I go and I snorkel. I leave the porch, I go snorkeling, get into the water. I see a dugong, which is a huge sea cow, like a manatee, but bigger and more powerful, which is quite rare. I was very lucky to have seen one. And then I went to the mangroves and snorkeled there, which are incredible because the coral comes right up to it. It's fantastic. So the next scene happens when I'm coming back from the mangroves, okay? I was coming back from the mangroves, snorkeling over the seagrass near my hut, looking for seahorses, when I heard some high-pitched commotion. Lifting my head, I saw a young woman splish-splashing around in a string bikini. She almost looked computer-generated, with her thin, almost orange body. Breasts so big, I actually noticed them. She was in water up to her knees, grazing her fingertips over the water, throwing her head back and blissfully laughing. Her teeth were white like bleached coral. A mustached hunk with a tatted face was photographing her with an enormous camera. With his black leather cap, he looked like one of the leather daddies in training I chatted with on Grindr in San Francisco. In a decade, he'll be washed up. So you're the bloke who lives here, he said as I threw my flippers onto the porch from the water. She pursed her moronic lips. With this view, this would go for hundreds of nights somewhere else. If you weren't here, this would be our bungalow. She tried to make it a joke, but she made her point. Is that right? I said curtly, as if I were avoiding confrontation with a saucy student. Welcome to Raja Ampat. How did you ever find this place? We have connections. We live in Indo when we're on the Gold Coast. When we're not on the Gold Coast. That means they were from Australia, Brisbane, Banana Land. Jimmy is going to open a restaurant in Bali, parts of which are the Down Under's equivalent of Daytona Beach. I'm an influencer and model on Insta. She should have starred in a millennial remake of Clueless. She's up to 100,000 followers, mate. Never been on there. I just have the Facebook. Then what do you do? He asked, realizing I was older than I looked. I'm a writer. You must be American, she said. Trump! Isn't that adorbs? Yes, I said, stepping up the ladder onto the porch, and this American needs to dry off. Any idea when you're leaving? Jimmy asked. I ignored him. I was the dork on their screen they wanted to swipe left into oblivion. After I dried myself off with a rag, Indexia brought me a new thermos with hot water. Indexia was the woman who was taking care of me there. It was her family's land. Katya and Jimmy were still having their photo shoot next to my hut, occasionally making out. Just look at the water in the mountains, Katya said too loudly, so I'd be sure and hear, motioning toward the sweep of the bay. Gorge, perf. Indexia, so this is a native Papuan woman, quite conservative in many ways. Indexia looked over at them with disgust and then at me, shaking her head. No good, she whispered. No good. Bikinis, like any public displays of affection, were offensive to her and her culture. Even for a bikini, Katya's was skimpy. After Indexia left to make lunch, I got a terrible headache. I felt sick to my stomach. I saw it. My solitude was over, and I was pissed. I paced inside my hut, hearing that basic bitch hissing at me, if you weren't here, this would be our bungalow. I took my journal out of its Ziploc bag. She isn't real, I vented in my journal. She won't even look like the pics they'll post to her Instagram after he photoshops her thigh gap in and touches up her scaly skin. And then, to soothe myself further, I got all fancy pants. Beauty. That isn't the sort I came here for. Hers is a vacuous beauty not found in the wild. It is as manufactured as styrofoam or propaganda! Exclamation point. I can see today I was jealous of her. My misogyny was born of envy. She was gorgeous in a way. She was on the tall side and thin, with what my mother and I longingly called small bones. I was jealous of Katya's hot body, jealous she had a boyfriend she could travel with, jealous of all the attention she was getting from him, jealous that she didn't have a care in the world or find life so triggering she had to live alone. As for her Instagram presence, I too have offered fuckloads of pics to get validation from male strangers. Both sets of our online followers were seduced by photographic lies. To live in that gap between one's actual and online selves, deepening a sense of unlovability and falseness. That's one reason my undergraduates kill themselves. One reason there's collective nihilism. It's real. As I learned from the documentary The Social Dilemma, the suicide rate for girls aged 15 to 19 has risen 70% since social media apps first appeared on smartphones in 2009, 151% for girls 10 to 14. Remember too that my now deleted Grindr and Katya's Instagram are not free platforms. We had been working unpaid for them, generating content, raising ad revenue, and getting addicted and shallower with each tap and swipe. That's expensive. Our followers weren't loving us. They were liking our lies. And this is just one final scene. Short. Meditating several mornings later, I heard a terrible buzzing nearby. It sounded like a swarm of angry hornets about to attack, or some sort of chainsaw. I came outside in my underwear. I looked around but saw nothing. The sound got louder, zooming around. Then I saw it. Above my hut, there was what looked like a sleek plastic toy car with 4 helicopter propellers. A drone. I'd only ever seen one on TV. It was a couple months earlier in a Black Mirror episode called Shut Up and Dance. The motherfucker slowly descended below the eaves to eye level. It maneuvered back and forth to tease me, then zipped away. I rushed out over the little bridge to get a better look at it. What was this doing here? It was high up in the air by now. Jimmy, in just board shorts, was holding the drone controller attached to his phone, oohing and eyeing with Katya about the footage he was getting. I stood there fuming, wondering how many likes and mean comments the video of me in my underwear would get. The drone soon crashed into a coconut palm and fell to the ground. Please, drone blades, I thought, please be broken. I didn't say a word to them. I went back to the hut and packed my things up. I said goodbye to the spider as big as my fist in the corner, the python hidden in the thatching that ate crickets at night. On the porch, I blew a kiss to the reefs and to the mountains. Then I asked Indexia's husband to take me just north on Gam, another island, to a family I'd met a year before, where even for Raja Ampat, there was heart-stopping choral I remembered from my trip the year before. Once I got settled in at the other island, I wrote in my journal, soon our phones will be floating on our eyeballs as smart contact lenses, and then there'll be chips implanted in our brains. I was trying to express my dystopian rage. Then I wrote, if you don't like this world, you can always immerse yourself in another. Virtual reality. And then what happens to empathy? And would you even care what happens then to the mangroves and the dugongs? Katya and Jimmy in paradise could go to hell. That night, I began a letter to my great niece in the 23rd century. I didn't have anyone else to talk to. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very powerful and funny and wide-ranging is an understatement. There is so much in there, and it's wonderful to hear it in your voice. And I was know you're a teacher, of course. I was hearing the teacher in you, I think, because I learned things. Even they just, suffused in there, suffused. The audience or viewers may not know that you're also a practitioner of meditation and a certified yoga instructor. And so I was thinking of you teaching a yoga class, and where they often give a little individuation at the start. And I was thinking, I want Greg to, teach a yoga class. I want to be in that class. And I felt the same way about you as a teacher. I said, yeah, I want to be in that class. So really, really wonderful.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
My questions that I had for you may be somewhat beside the point. You answered many of them in the reading, but I'd like to encourage anybody watching to type in their comments and questions, and as they come in, we'll ask them. So you've practiced meditation. You're a certified yoga instructor. You're a traveler of the world, and I know it's hard to explain one's practice, but could you have written this without having practiced meditation and yoga and spent those hours alone and in thought and
Mhm. No, I really had to. I think that's why poetry was important for me, because it was a way for me to, right after I left high school, it was a way for me to just learn to talk about my feelings, even if it was in a kind of indirect way, in a coded way. Um, and so I think poetry gave me poetry, meditation, being in nature, including on coral reefs, all of yoga, all of those things. All of those things, I guess, for a lot of people or for some people, or maybe some people think of them as kind of like, especially yoga. I think it kind of like something that's, I don't know, fashionable, and you get like designer pants for it, and a designer mat or something,
yeah.
and it was never like that for me. And I don't even teach yoga. I mean, I trained as a yoga teacher in India, which was very hard. But I think, um, so I think that the ability to be in the moment, Jeffrey, that's something that I have had to cultivate. And when I say to be in the moment, what that means is, we all know that that's not always cupcakes and cartwheels, and that being in the moment requires tolerating discomfort. And it's never just being in the moment, right? It's about practicing. And so I think over the past 20 years, I have practiced being in the moment. But not only practicing being in the moment, but practicing a sense of safety, because I did not have that. A sense of safety, a sense of, it's okay for me to be in my body. It's okay for me to be in the presence of other people. It's okay for me to open my mouth. Like it's really cultivating that sense of safety. And for me, I think I needed to be alone in nature to cultivate that sense of safety. And maybe I needed to be as far as possible from where I grew up. And it's, I think, about 9,800 miles away as the crow flies.
From Florida.
From Florida. I needed to get as far away as possible. And yet you can see from the reading that where I was in some ways was like Florida, but it was an alternate version of Florida. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that neuroplasticity. I think that, to me, neuroplasticity is one of the most. To me, it's more inspiring than any god or goddess, or any religion or any spiritual system. It's just the idea that we, even as adults, can change our brains. And maybe a related word would be neurogenesis, that we can actually create new neurons. We used to think neurons can't be born in adults, and they can, in the hippocampus at least. So this is the great hope, I think, even as the world kind of begins to, in some ways, unravel. It's like people, with all this new incredible research and practices out there, people are able to take responsibility for their pain and for their suffering. And in some ways, that is the sort of resilience people are going to need in the coming years and decades. They're going to need it. They're going to have it, or we're just, it's because we already see mental health. The world is in a mental health crisis, and that is my contention, that is actually related to the ecological crisis.
Yes, fascinating thesis, and one that feels true and is backed up by quite a bit of now early research in the field. You're a diver as well, as we talked about in the beginning, and I wanted to let the audience know that the photos that we showed in the little 1.5 minute kind of slideshow were all taken by you.
Yeah.
And
GoPro.
Yeah, GoPro. Makes
Nothing
you a pro.
fancy.
Yeah, I know. But talk a bit about diving. I'm a diver. I'm still a perpetual baby bubbler, as we say in diving. Not that many hours. Keep trying. But that's a world unto itself, a beautiful one, and silent, or actually quite
Silent.
noisy, but silent of words, absent of
Exactly.
words.
Exactly. Yeah, I think diving is. I mean, I think in some ways it's been like I felt like an alien when I was a kid. I felt like an extraterrestrial,
Mm.
you know, and I very much identify with ET, and ET appears in the memoir quite prominently. And so, in a way, it's like reenacting childhood to be
Mhm.
in this realm, and to again be a stranger, to again be an alien. But instead of fear, at least in my case, instead of fear, there's a lot of awe, there's a lot of wonder. And so I get to repattern, right? I get to lay new neural pathways. And I can actually own my alien aspect. And also it taught me courage. You know, it can be very scary to be, you know, underwater 40 meters, 120, 130 feet below the surface of the ocean. And so it was also a way for me to prove that that I could take the pressure, literally and metaphorically. And so, and I also think it's a metaphor for you know, we think of Adrienne Rich's poem "Diving into the Wreck." You know, it seems to me that that it really was training ground for other deep dives that I have been doing that are not water related, you know, that are more psychological. And some of, I won't really talk, I'm not going to talk about that today, but just kind of going to the Amazon, that's sort of the last part of the book. So being sort of diving into the ocean, and then towards the end, it's more like diving into my psyche, going to the Amazon, and being there and doing that. So it's yeah, diving has been really a wonderful practice for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, and you've been diving for a long time, 25 years.
I
or more.
have. Yeah, I've been diving for about 10 years. Been diving, but I've been snorkeling on the reefs for since I was very, very young. Yeah.
The where does the section you read us today come in the book? You mentioned when we talked, you said the ending was hopeful, and you didn't want to give that away.
Yes,
So
so
we'll save
hopeful.
that for, you know, when it's
So
published and
hopeful.
in between covers.
Yes. Right. Well, the rainforest of the seas, that's the coral triangle. In right, the rainforest of the seas, that's the coral reefs I went to, and then I go to the Amazon on land. So it's there's a sort of a mirror structure there. Yeah. So that it's sort of that this section I read is kind of coming towards the somewhere in the middle, because I have to show what's led up to my going to Raja Ampat, why I had to go to the reefs. It's not just like I saw it in National Geographic, it was cool, I wanted to go. It was much more deep seated than that.
And Katya and Jimmy, though, talking about cool, you know, or trying to be cool, it seems like they gave you a little gift, you know, a narrative gift.
Did. They gave me a narrative gift, but they also give me it was a moment of humility, you know. And that, well, I think that and I'll probably add this to that section, but it's more that you know, I think that alone you can feel kind of like king of the world or something, or like, this is mine, you know. And it isn't mine. And if people want to come there for other reasons, that's okay, you know, as long as they're not, I mean, drones aren't so great for wildlife, but but I think that they showed me that I still had a whole lot of work to do around compassion, and stepping out of my selfishness.
Yeah.
Frankly.
And I love the Fantasia sequence. It's the way I was thinking of it.
Yeah.
Great sequence
Thank you.
of Fantasia where everything swirls around. And you referenced Edward Abbey.
Yeah.
To me, I hear many of the other great conservation writers sort of echoing in your work. You're bringing a whole new dimension to it. You're not writing a documentary or even an Attenborough, a personal and poetic dimension that's really wonderful. Other writers, nature writers that you admire, that you've drawn from, Abby being one. Such a great tradition.
Yeah, I think Thoreau certainly has been a huge influence on me. But ecofeminists like Val Plumwood, who was an Australian philosopher who was attacked by a crocodile. She's been a real inspiration to me. Octavia Butler, she was an African-American science fiction writer, and the environment very much figures in her work. Annie Dillard is just Annie Dillard. If you can hear me, I love you.
Well, she's right up the road still, I think.
She is mine. I'm a complete devotee of hers. So so she's a huge influence as well. And apparently RuPaul's Drag Race too is a big influence on my work.
A naturalist.
Yes.
That she is. Yeah. Well, we have some nice kudos that came in from Anita Sawyer. Says splendid work, Greg.
Yes,
thank you for sharing.
I know Anita. Hi. She's also a memoirist. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Who writes about healing. Yeah.
Yeah. And Anthony Pooley, speaking of Instagram and likes, gives you 4 applause. So
thank you, Anthony Pooley. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think Cynthia Elliott asked, "Have you accomplished what you hoped to in your residency at Merrill House?" So you've had a little bit longer residency, 6 weeks in total. Another week. You did tell me that in the final week you're doing a little socializing, and then back into isolation.
That's
as
right.
much as possible in this final week.
That's right. We're going to have some socializing tonight, and then I think after that, I am just going to try and finish another chapter. But Cynthia, I am amazed by how much I've accomplished here, and I really think it has to do with James Merrill's benevolent spirit, and he was a very, as we all know, a very prolific poet who was also very generous and an exquisite craftsperson. So I've been definitely buoyed by his spirit here. So yeah.
Well, I had so many more questions, but we're at the top of the hour, and I think that's a wonderful place to land it. Thank you, Greg.
Thank
you.
And
I'll email you my other questions about Elizabeth Bishop and Florida Deserta, and others. And I wanted to say well, let me go to my last section. Now you're seeing the gears turn. So it's a privilege for us and our audience. Really, one of the great things about Writers in Residence for us, selfishly, is that one, we get to know you as a writer and look forward to your new work, and to hear from work in progress. Like hearing someone work on a musical piece or something, that's just still, all arranging and working out. You could hear that in your piece. And we wish you well and look forward to seeing Roe between hardcovers or on our Kindle or in journals, wherever it appears.
Well, this is YouTube, so anyone could hear this and take an interest. So we'll see we'll see what
Exactly.
the fates have in store. So thank you so much. This has been an incredible honor, and just eternal gratitude to you and to the whole committee and to James Merrill and David Jackson.
Thank you. And I want to thank our audience for joining us on today's session. As I mentioned, you can order Centaur through Bank Square Books. And on a program note, we look forward to hosting Desiree Bailey, 2020 Yale Younger Poet. Next, she'll be here for 2 weeks in June, and her reading is June 19th. And certainly join our email list if you're not on it. She will be hosted by Annie Philbrick, a new Merrill Committee member, and many of you know her as owner of both Bank Square Books and Savoy. So we're delighted to have her on the committee and have her step up as a host moderator. So What Noise Against the Cane? That's Desiree's book, and it's available on the Merrill bookshelf online right now. Thanks again for joining us, and please donate if you feel so moved. And with that, we'll say goodbye.
The first writers in residence came to the James Merrill House 25 years ago, shortly after James Merrill's death in 1995. Since then, over 80 writers have visited, staying in his home, a National Historic Landmark, to work on projects of their own. Thanks to Merrill's generosity, the house now belongs to the Stonington Village Improvement Association and is an ongoing inspiration for writers and poets from around the world. For more information, visit our website, jamesmerrillhouse.org. Thank you.